Hi, I'm Martin Gillespie. I'm the host of Metabolic Wellbeing Without the BS. I'm absolutely delighted that having one of not just the US leading thinkers on metabolic health and health in general, but I would put him in probably the top five. Robert Lufkin, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much, Martin. I'm a fan of your show, your program, and it's an honor to be here today.
Rob, I want to pull the listeners in right away. Can you explain, first of all, why you feel on this present day being healthy is important to you?
Being healthy is important to me because it's basically out of self-interest. I want to be around for we shared offline. We both have teenage daughters. I want to be around for, to see them grow up and see their kids and their grandkids. So it's out of self-interest. But I think whatever our purpose in life, whatever our goals are, we can accomplish them much better, and we're more likely to accomplish them if we remain healthy. It's about functioning in the world and accomplishing our purpose and what we're here for.
Now, you've got an incredible background. Can you roughly explain what it is you do and what you've been doing over the last sort of 10 years? Because you've shifted your mindset, really. Because you're based in LA, you've shifted your mindset to go, wait a minute, some of the training I've had in my younger career, and you've flipped it on its head. You talk us through that.
Yeah. Well, my background is I'm a physician. I'm a practicing physician. My specialty is medical imaging. I've spent essentially, I'm a representative of the medical establishment. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not a fringe doctor. I'm literally a professor at leading medical schools in California my whole career. And I, you know, I've written hundreds of scientific papers, peer-reviewed papers, as you do in that type of position, as everyone does. And my lab, which does research, has received literally millions of dollars in grants from the federal government, from NIH, also from drug companies, and also from equipment manufacturers. So, and then I also teach residents and as often as not, learn from them more than I teach them, I'm sure, as many people find out in this role. But and then finally I get to practice medicine. So I actually see patients, and that's my background. That's where I'm coming from. But about 10 years, I had some events that happened personally in my life that forced me to look deeply at my beliefs and question what many of the things I've been teaching, literally, and what my colleagues, many of them, are still teaching, and kind of rethink and reframe what chronic disease is and what health is. And let me go on record, first of all, that's saying I think the Western healthcare system is, I'm obviously a product of it. I'm part of the system, and I think it is unequaled in its development for solving many conditions in humanity, making us much better, healthier as a people, and specifically things like in the 20th century, public health and infectious disease. The idea that these could be controlled with a number of techniques through modern medicine has basically changed humanity forever. And similarly, even today, if I walk outside and I get hit by a bus, I'm going to think about lifestyle, and lifestyle may actually help my healing process, but in the acute moment, it won't save my life. And what will save my life is Western medicine giving me a blood transfusion. I'm going to need my bones set. I may need an operation to repair my splenic rupture. These things are necessary to save my life. So I'm a huge fan of Western medicine. The problem, though, I think, is in the 21st century, there are a number of diseases that have come to the forefront that we've never seen before in history to the degree that we're seeing now. In other words, unprecedented worldwide epidemics of certain, what they're called chronic diseases. And these diseases, even correcting for population, we've never seen this percentage of patients with them. So it's an epidemic of unprecedented proportions. And the problem is, when modern medicine tries to apply the tools that work for acute injuries or, fractures or blood transfusions, or even for infectious disease, where you give a pill or you give surgery, as it turns out, for these diseases, that doesn't work. It may control the symptoms, and people can be even fooled into thinking, well, I got a pill, my symptoms are controlled. But what's happening underneath them all is a underlying root cause, which is very similar for all of them. And this root cause is what people need to address, and it's being overlooked by healthcare today.
Now, just to get a bit of clarification, Rob, in your world and from what you've experienced, you mentioned there about chronic illnesses and chronic diseases. Which ones in particular? Are there certain patterns that you have seen over particularly the last 10, 15 years, that many people kind of ignore?
Yeah. Yeah, well, first the disease, and then we can talk about the symptoms if you want. But the examples of the diseases, the things we're talking about, are things like obesity, which has just exploded in the last 30 years, to the point where in this country, in the United States, most adults are either obese or overweight. It's just the way it is. And so this explosion in this disease, it indicates that it's probably not due to genetics, because genetics didn't change in 30 years. And for all these diseases, our genetics are constant. But instead, how the genes are expressed, our epigenetics, is controlled through lifestyle. We can talk about that at some point. But it's basically, the first one is obesity has exploded about 30 years ago. About 10 years later, another type of disease took off called type 2 diabetes, or insulin resistance, exploded. And we're seeing increasing rates of hypertension. And then the other chronic diseases that are also linked to this, in my opinion, and they're also very important, because for me, for you, and the majority of our listeners, these will be the diseases that will determine our longevity, because this will be what we die of. And it's not a long list. You can go anywhere on the internet and find it. It's statistically, we're most likely to die of cardiovascular disease. Typically it's called atherosclerosis, and it manifests as a heart attack or a stroke. Second on the list is cancer. And the cancer numbers are increasing, especially in younger and younger people. That is very concerning. Third, then the list goes down to things like neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease and a few others. And we can include mental health in there as well. But the fascinating thing to me that just blew me away is that these diseases are linked by basic drivers that drive all of them. In other words, the same thing that will help me lose weight will also decrease my risk for diabetes, and also decrease my risk for cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's disease, and mental illness down the line. And I don't think many people, and certainly many of my colleagues that are still teaching this at medical schools, are aware of this, and I don't feel it's getting the emphasis that it deserves.
There's a lot that you've mentioned there, but I missed a little opportunity that you opened the envelope. You said 10 years ago you started changing. What was the trigger for you to sort of step outside and go, I have to look after my health?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to say, well, I just wanted to make the world a better place, and I just do this, but no, it was actually.
Well, listen, the title of this, Rob, you've got to remember, is Metabolic Wellbeing Without the BS. So there's no BS in this.
All right, well, I'm going to give it to you straight, Martin. I was doing fine. I was doing my grants and writing papers and teaching and seeing patients. Everything was going fine. And then, like happens to so many people in this space, I got diagnosed with 4 of these chronic diseases, of the ones I just mentioned. And I went to my doctors and they said, "Hey, don't worry about it. We got you covered. Here's a prescription." And they gave me a pill for each one of them, a pharmaceutical. And I said, "Okay, is there anything else I should do? Lifestyle, anything else?" He goes, "Well, you can do lifestyle. It doesn't really work. What you really, basically, you need to realize you're going to be on these pills for the rest of your life. So get used to it." But they said that they implied that these pills would not only treat the symptoms, but things were under control, so taking these pills, deal done, don't worry about it, move on. And the really deeply disturbing thing that I came to realize is that for these diseases, most of these chronic diseases, there is a pill or a surgery for them, but the pill or the surgery only takes care of the symptoms primarily. So I won't necessarily die right on the spot, but the underlying condition continues to progress. As an example, type 2 diabetes is epidemic proportions. In the United States, we're approaching half of the population either pre-diabetic or diabetic. And type 2 diabetes is a terrible disease to have. It's the number one cause of surgical amputations. It's the number one cause of renal dialysis and renal failure, blindness. It increases your risk of all the other chronic diseases we mentioned dramatically. Alzheimer's is called type 3 diabetes because of its association with diabetes. But anyway, type 2 diabetes is a problem. You've probably talked about this already with your audience, but it's a problem with insulin resistance, where in type 2 diabetes is the most common type of diabetes today. Over 90% of cases are this type 2 diabetes. So it's really the one that's exploding, but it has to do with the body's becomes resistant to the effects of insulin. Insulin is an important hormone that tells our body to store fat and clears the blood of glucose. So if we eat certain foods that contain high glucose, they cause our blood sugar or our blood glucose to spike. The insulin hormone directs our body to remove the blood sugar from our body and store it as fat and do other things with it. And that protects us because the high blood sugar is harmful and does a lot of damage to cells and protein. So in fact, very high blood sugars can be fatal acutely. And that's what diabetics die of.
How many patients have you seen over the years that will say, "Oh, but doc, I don't take any sugar in my tea or coffee"?
Yeah,
All
yeah.
the
I mean,
hidden sugars.
yeah, there are hidden sugars in practically everything. I mean, carbohydrates, which is the food group that contains sugars, also contains something called starches, which are chains of glucose bound together. Even though they're different chemically, as soon as they enter our mouth, there are enzymes that break them down into glucose. So starches, things like rice, flour, wheat, those kinds of things, break down almost immediately to glucose in our mouth. And then as you implied, there are a number of, there are almost innumerable types of sugar that the food industry has given, or not innumerable, but many different types of sugars that the food industry disguises with different names, that they call them different things. So when you look at the food label, you go, "Oh, it doesn't say sugar, I'm not eating sugar," when actually it may be another type of sugar, or even many of the artificial sweeteners, which act as sweeteners for our body, have untoward healthy effects that some of them can even drive insulin resistance and have, similar effects to diabetes. But the point was, with the diabetes, giving the insulin was life-saving. In other words, if I have super high levels of glucose and I go into a coma from that, giving insulin will save my life. So it's truly life-saving there. But putting me on insulin as as a daily treatment for my type 2 diabetes, it's been shown in a number of studies that tightly controlling my glucose with insulin doesn't really lower the risk of these complications down the road. In other words, the progression of diabetes to, foot ulcers and amputation and renal failure and these other things isn't really controlled by the insulin. So it's going to save my life acutely, but it's not really altering many of the aspects of the disease that we need to be concerned about. I mean, another example is a heart attack. If you or I go in with a heart attack today, we're likely going to get a stent. A heart attack is caused to blood vessel narrowing going to the heart, and one of the treatments for a heart attack is to put a little stent, which is a wire cage, in to open up the blood vessel again to restore flow to the heart. And for many people, they think, wow, I got a stent, my heart attack's taken care of. Whew, glad I did that. I'm done. What they don't realize is, similar to the insulin with type 2 diabetes, this acute intervention, which may save your life acutely, actually doesn't have any effect on your long-term survival. In other words, it doesn't change, the heart attacks you're going to get down the road, and it doesn't change the underlying disease. In other words, the atherosclerosis, the narrowing of the blood vessels that caused this heart attack in the first place, continue in all the other blood vessels of the body. In fact, they even continue in the stent, and the stent will reclot off over time. So giving the stent or the insulin or the pills or the surgery, in many cases with these chronic diseases, can give us a false sense of, well, I'm doing something, I'm treating it, when really, in my opinion, the best way to address it is with lifestyle and the root causes. And I'm not recommending for anyone to stop taking your prescription medicines. Any change in those should be done with your doctor's advice. But what I am saying is lifestyle is extremely powerful. I would suggest it's more powerful than those pills or surgery that you're going to take down the road for these chronic diseases. And for some of these diseases, you can certainly slow the progression, and some of them you can even reverse them with lifestyle, which is just mind-blowing if you think about it.
One of the massive trends, and we'll go down lifestyle in a moment, but I want to capture your knowledge on the impact on the whole body when we adopt a state of fasting. Now, I know a lot of people might think, oh, 12 hours is great, 18 hours. Some people will do 3 days. And I will admit there is a massive difference between men doing fasting and females doing fasting. We have to be really mindful. So whatever we talk about here is general terms here. But fasting is such a great way of controlling the insulin in your body.
Absolutely. Jason Fung, who's a friend and a nephrologist who's an expert on fasting, one of the leading authorities on fasting. He actually wrote the foreword to my book. He famously said, there's one thing that the religious leaders throughout history agree on, all the way from Buddha to Jesus to Muhammad, down the list. And it's not a spiritual concept at all, sadly, unfortunately. But the one thing they
I'm sure
agree
many
on,
yogis will take that as a spiritual way forward, Rob.
well, that's true. That's true. Yeah. But the one thing they agree on, almost all major major religions agree that fasting is healthy. And I think it is, and I think it's an underutilized thing, because fasting does a number of things. It changes the body's metabolism from burning glucose primarily, which is when we have a lot of sugar in our diet. When sugar's not in our diet, we still have to survive, but the body has a mechanism for that, and that is to burn fat. And most of us have a supply of fat that will last us for days, some of us weeks. And one man that I talk about in my book actually was very obese, but he went on a fast for over a year and didn't eat a single thing. And he was medically monitored, and his story was published in a peer-reviewed scientific paper, and all his lab data, everything there. But it was remarkable. He was able to survive on his body fat. But fasting, whether you do it for short term or longer term, converts our metabolism from primarily glucose burning to burning fat, which is called ketosis, or burning ketones. You probably heard that expression. And when we burn ketones, there are a number of positive effects that we don't get when we just burn glucose. For example, in the brain, um, burning ketones can, switching to a ketogenic diet can improve in some patients, not all patients, but some patients with Alzheimer's disease can improve the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, memory impairment, even to the point people can take exogenous ketones. In other words, even without fasting, they drink ketones, and it fools the body into thinking it's in ketosis, or adds ketones to their system. So, but this ketosis, it's the burning the ketones in this fasting metabolic state helps with Alzheimer's disease. With seizures, it's the number one treatment for seizures for over thousands of years is to fast and go into the metabolic state. The brain inflammation goes down, the seizures stop. Chris Palmer
I was just thinking of Chris there, actually. His book is
yeah.
brilliant. For those who don't have it, Brain Energy. And I know we're going to plug your book, but Brain Energy is brilliant. Chris has put it really well and simplified a lot of the context around ketogenic diet and the ripple impact that it has on you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he was using it to treat psychiatric patients at a Harvard hospital, inpatients, people with serious mental health conditions, to the point they were medicated, they couldn't go home, they couldn't have a job. And some of them, not all of them, but some of them, he was able to reverse their disease to the point where they actually stopped all medications, went out of the hospital, and went home. And I asked him, I was talking to him about it. I said, Chris, how do you know it's the ketogenic diet? I know that was the intervention, but it could have been all sorts of stuff. Maybe it was just luck. And is there any proof that it's actually ketosis? And he says, well, Mr. Smith had schizoaffective disorder, schizophrenia, which your listeners may know the sort of classic symptom of schizophrenia is voices talk to you from inside your head. Voices tell you things. That means you're in psychosis and having that psychotic episode. And so he said, yeah, Mr. Smith, we got him off all medicines. He's now left the hospital. He's back with his family. He's gone back to his regular job. But he tells me, and he's on a ketogenic diet, so he only eats foods that basically keep him in ketosis. That you can do similar to fasting. You can eat certain foods that do that. But he says whenever he eats junk food or he eats things that take him out of ketosis, he knows that he's doing it because the voices start talking to him again. He can hear them, and then he goes back into ketosis, and they go the same way. I heard the same thing from Heather Sanderson, who is a researcher, or not a researcher, she's a practitioner and a researcher in Alzheimer's disease, a physician. She's a protege of Del Bredesen.
I know
and
that.
She run.
So I've certified in Bredesen protocol.
Oh, you have? Yeah. So have I. Yeah.
I know it really well, and I advocate a lot of that. Some of the nutritional stuff I kind of disagree, but the protocol is brilliant.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly. I'm not saying ketogenic diet or ketosis is a cure-all for Alzheimer's disease. It may be vitamin D, it may be parasites, it may be lead toxicity, it may be, other type of inflammation driven by all sorts of things. But sort of as an example, Heather runs these nursing homes for Alzheimer's disease, which, unlike all other nursing homes that I've heard of, the patients actually get better and they go home at the end, where all nursing homes, Alzheimer's is a one-way street. You don't go home after Alzheimer's disease. It's, sadly, you just deteriorate. My mom died of Alzheimer's disease a few years ago. I know the drill.
I went to see
But
an old uncle of mine here in Glasgow, and he's in his late 80s. He's got type 2 diabetes. And what do they give him? White bread sandwiches.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, they just don't know. And white bread, of course, has starch, and it's like eating a candy bar, and that makes the type 2 diabetes worse. But what Heather was saying, to complete that thought, was same sort of thing. I said, Heather, because one of the things she does in all her centers is everyone's on a ketogenic diet. They only serve ketogenic food that will simulate this fasting state in many ways. And I said, okay, great. You put people on ketogenic diets, they get better, but you're doing all sorts of other stuff. So how do you know it's ketosis in any of these people? Do you have any evidence for that? And she says, well, Mr. Jones, I know the ketosis works for him because I can tell when he's in ketosis and his grandchildren walk into the room, he hugs them, remembers their name, and smiles. When he goes out of ketosis, when they walk in the room, he doesn't recognize them and doesn't know who they are. So it can be as dramatic as that. And then continuing that thought on, not only mental health, not only Alzheimer's disease, not only seizures, but now people are using ketogenic therapy for malignancies, for cancer. And it's not to replace everything on cancer, it's adjunctive therapy, but the possibilities are really interesting. Going back to Otto Warburg's metabolic work on the metabolic basis of cancer. And then cardiovascular disease, of course, going in ketosis can help. For diabetes, going on a ketogenic diet will reverse type 2 diabetes in many, not all, but many of the patients. Going on a ketogenic diet also, in this metabolically healthy diet or simulating fasting, will cause people to lose weight because they burn their body fat. Hypertension, half of adults in America are hypertensive almost. Going on this type of diet, this nutritional ketosis or fasting, will cause people's blood pressure to dramatically lower, including hypertensives, to many of them where they stop their blood pressure medicine. So it seems like all these diseases have a fundamental metabolic cause that can be addressed through lifestyle. But it's fascinating. There's no pill that really, I mean, as much as I would love a pill, there's no pill that really does this for lifestyle. In other words, it's a different sort of paradigm. It's good that we're in control and we get to choose every day with our lifestyle and we get to control it. But the downside is, many people, myself included, I'm basically lazy. I would much rather take a pill than change who I am, which what changing your lifestyle requires. It requires me to think differently about what I eat, how I sleep, how I get up. But ultimately, that is the path to wellness, changing who you are, not doing the same thing and just getting surgery or a pill or something like that.
It's funny, Rob, you mentioned there about ketogenic and cancer. So I had stage 4 cancer 12 years ago. So I went through, I had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which in certain aspects of the medical world would say it's a non-curable cancer, but you can manage it. So I went through 2.5 years of chemotherapy, and I said, this was back in Australia, and I said that chemotherapy gave me 2 things: a Scottish accent and a wonderful sense of humor, which I'm grateful for both. But I changed my lifestyle I was always interested in nutrition, and I went to see several nutritionists and dietitians, and I would be saying, I'm taking this medication. They didn't really care. They just pulled out. In Australia, it's known similarly as in the US, the standard Australian / standard American diet, and said, eat porridge, 10 vegetables a day, reduce red meats, alcohol, try and eliminate, which I kind of agree with, sort of moderate it. And in Australia, it has a very big pandemic of alcohol misabuse, if that makes sense. but there was no correlation, no personalized care. And I think that that's something that really needs to be, if you're going to invest in your health, investing in multidisciplines is so important. It's a healthcare community to help that patient be well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that, you know, there's a saying that, you know, doctors don't make us healthy, doctors make us less sick. If we want to be healthy, we have to do that ourselves. And that speaks to the lifestyle and stuff. The Western healthcare system is designed to deliver a pill or surgery because it's easy. You can do for me to take a pill, I don't have to change who I am. And even to have surgery, I just have to block off a few days on my schedule, but I'm still don't change who I am. But to change my lifestyle, you can't do it in 7 minutes with a conversation with your doctor. It needs much more engagement to what you're doing with coaching. I think that is the secret to, you know, engaging with people, with communities, with their sense of, you know, who they are, and more of a long-term relationship. I think that's the secret to getting people really to change their lifestyle and reinvent themselves.
But it's also, again, general medical practitioners are not trained in preventative health. And you tapped on it there, that they'll see a patient for 7 minutes. And unfortunately, one of the biomarkers, which we spoke off camera, one of our friends, if you want to call it, the wonderful Malcolm Kendrick, around cholesterol, a lot of medics would look and say, oh, your cholesterol's too high, here's a statin.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think
Oh,
I think doctors, I mean, no one, most people don't get up and want to harm people, but I think it's the system, and the system is just designed that doctors are designed to put out fires. In other words, when your hemoglobin A1C, which is a marker for type 2 diabetes, when it gets above a certain point, you're diagnosed as type 2 diabetic, then I give you stuff. When you have a heart attack, then I'll start taking care of you. When you get cancer, I'll start taking care of you. Or when your memory goes and we say, yep, you've got Alzheimer's disease, then we'll start taking care of you. I think what needs to be done is these diseases don't just start the moment you're diagnosed in the doctor's office. All of these chronic diseases that we're talking about, in my opinion, begin years to decades before the doctor diagnoses them. And if we all wait until the doctor diagnoses them, we're at a disadvantage. It's not, you know, it's not game over, but it's much more harder to reverse things or treat things after they're diagnosed by the doctor. I think, I mean, as an example, my thinking about type 2 diabetes really changed when I got into this. I used to think type 2 diabetes, you know, like many diseases that we all learn about, you either get it or you don't get it. And some people have it, some people don't have it. Well, there's some interesting studies that came out that changed my thinking on that. And they showed adults, large studies of adults from the Framingham data and other data, that these were non-diabetic adults, and they looked at, well, what's their HA1C like? Well, it's obviously below the threshold, you know, which is 6.5 in the United States for diabetes. So it's below that. So they're not diabetics, to be clear. These are non-diabetic adults. But what happened was, if they plot their HA1C levels over time, in other words, by age, the older they get, the higher the HA1C levels. In other words, so if you play that out to its full conclusion, that essentially we're all on the path, many of us, if not all of us, are on the path to type 2 diabetes. In other words, it's one more thing like gray hair or like wrinkles that if I don't die of something else sooner, I will eventually get type 2 diabetes if I live that long, and I want to live a long time. So how does that inform my life now? Well, I begin thinking about my lifestyle changes in terms of things that make diabetes worse. And the things that make diabetes worse are the things that drive insulin resistance. And it just so happens that the things that drive insulin resistance and inflammation are the same things that drive all those chronic diseases that I talked about. So whatever lifestyle changes I embrace will benefit not only my risk of type 2 diabetes down the road, but also all those other diseases. But the point is, it's not too early to get started now. You know, instead of waiting till you're 50 or 60 or 70 and you get those diagnosed, start when you're 30, you know, and begin. I mean, there's no reason we all shouldn't have a healthy lifestyle throughout our entire life.
One of the things I advocate, and hopefully this might ripple around your community as well, we all have a unique DNA footprint, i.e. the day we were born. I advocate, and especially for that corporate executive, on the day of your birthday, take the day off, go and see a holistic dental practitioner, a holistic medical practitioner, and check in with a health coach. And if you're married and you've got to respect a significant other, bring them with you. Show that, if you're a bloke particularly, show that vulnerability that you want to take control. Men like to take control. We're built that way. Our right brain is built that way. Take control, but share it with the community of the people you love as well.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think getting access to those people is really important, and it can be really challenging. A lot of people, you know, come to me and say, hey, I need a good, you know, naturopathic, functional, integrative oriented physician. Who would you recommend in this area? And it's challenging. We need to have better, you know, or coaches, you know, who can you recommend for that? And it's challenging, but there's some societies that are starting to get together. The Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners and a few others are beginning to compile lists. But what you said is really important. I agree totally.
In the US, you've got that society. In Australia, there's the low carb down under community, which is fantastic. Some great, really amazing people there. And here in the UK, there's the Public Health Collaboration, which is doing some terrific work. In fact, Ben Bickman's presenting at it next week. So
Great.
There are little pockets that are doing some great things. But I think that the biggest challenge is that people have to accept the responsibility for their own health.
Yep. Yeah. And I think personally, I think that's a good thing, because I grew up in the era where, you know, you go into the doctor's office and he or she will basically give me some pills or surgery, tell me what to do, and then, you know, I do it. But, you know, it's a changing world, and for lifestyle that doesn't really work. And also, if you think about it, we're entering a new era where me as patient can now take control. I can get a sense of agency over my own life because I am CEO of my own health. And the doctors that I consult are just consultants. And if you think about it, you know, even though I went to medical school for many years, you still know more about you and your life experiences and everything you've done than I will ever be able to know as your doctor. So you ultimately know more information. I may know more about certain diseases and stuff, but you're in the best position to advocate for yourself and make decisions for yourself. And I think we're seeing a new era where authority, agency returns to the patient, and the patient's in charge. And you have to be in charge if you're going to do your lifestyle, and you have to do lifestyle if you want to fight these chronic diseases. So it all seems to be working out for the best.
I want to take a little segue around one area which is very, very common, that people will probably say every third sentence: I'm so stressed.
Yeah.
Stress is a pandemic.
Yep. Absolutely.
And it manifests exactly the same way, in my opinion, as what insulin does to your body.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Stress can drive, you know, hormones like cortisol. It can drive insulin, can drive inflammation. I mean, inflammation is a normal response to stress. The problem is chronic stress, chronic inflammation drive those diseases. The fascinating thing about stress that I didn't realize before, that has really changed my way of thinking about it, was that, you know, for a lot of these effects like sleep and things, you know, they affect us and we can modulate. But stress is really interesting because stress is not so much what happens to us in our lives that affects our stress, but what really determines our stress is how we respond to what happens to us in our lives. In other words, it's fascinating that the same event may be very stressful and painful for one person, and literally the same event almost will be a joyous event for someone else. Let's say someone having surgery for, for their malignancy or something could be very stressful and, painful experience for the person going through it. Similarly, a woman having surgery to deliver her baby, she'll experience the same type of pain, but the psychological stress will not be there because it's a joyous event. If I'm outside and it starts raining and one way I could look at it is, oh, my nice new clothes are ruined by the rain. Oh, woe is me, it's terrible, I'm a victim, all that. Or alternatively, it's raining. Wow, we really need rain in California. It feels so good. The warmth on my face, the water, the plants are going to love it. It's a joyous day. And I think we don't always control our responses to stress because they're driven by childhood trauma and all the things that make our personality. But I think we get to control it a lot more than we imagine through mindfulness techniques and other things where we control our reactivity, where we can observe things in the environment and then not immediately become stressed by them. And that to me was a real wake-up call and a real powerful tool about stress and how we can modulate it.
And the other sort of major pillar that I think a lot of people forget about, and especially in this day and age where there are very limited boundaries and barriers. People are working till 11 o'clock midnight, and then they try and get up at 6 in the morning. The importance of sleep.
Yep. And I think we as medical professionals fail miserably in this because we don't walk the walk or talk the talk. I mean, I know from experience, I used to carry a pager around, thing they call you with, from the hospital.
That's you showed your age, that you missed out on, or what's the TV programs, Grey's Anatomy, or the one with George Clooney in it years ago.
Yeah. And even to this day, people have really crazy call schedules. I mean, I used to, be on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I get called at all hours, and I thought it made me tough, and I thought I was helping my patients when actually it made me sick, and I was potentially harming a lot of my patients because I think the evidence is pretty strong that like exercise, like so many other things, there's a very narrow window of sleep, and it's about centered around 8 hours plus or minus an hour or two. But if somebody tells you they only need 4 hours at night to sleep, that's probably not correct. And we all need good quantity of sleep, also good quality of sleep. Now, some people, by the nature of their jobs, they have to take call or they have to, work the night shift or something like that. My recommendation is just be very, very careful because if famous studies, you take college students and you deprive them of sleep, what happens? Their insulin resistance shoots up, they become type 2 diabetics, inflammation takes off. All the untoward effects that we've been talking about can be driven by sleep as well as stress and all these other things.
It's interesting, actually, here in the UK, I'm doing some work with organizations that about 30% of their workforce work shift work, and it's not just the medical profession. So you're looking at people stocking shelves in the supermarkets, but the big one that a lot of people forget about their metabolic well-being are those involved in the travel industry, airline pilots.
Yeah.
An airline pilot makes that wrong decision due to a lack of sleep.
Yep.
That's a huge disaster.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just the long-term effects.
I've been phrasing it to the organizations that it's cortisol social jet lag.
Yep.
Having.
Yeah.
Because You want to get to that destination. You want to be this, you want to be that, but your body is like that elastic band and you're not allowing it to rest.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And
That
sleep
needs to.
is so, so important. And, you know, regardless of the time of year, having an alcoholic drink the night before, so just as you go to sleep, does nothing for you. In fact, that is a pathway to type 2 diabetes.
I mean, I like alcohol as much as the next person, but as I learn more about these conditions, and as I learn how harmful fructose is, which is a type of sugar that is basically, it's very similar to alcohol, and it's detoxified in the liver and causes liver damage and everything else. And if I stay away from fructose as I do, then logically I should also stay away from alcohol, because alcohol is also a liver poison, you know. And so I found myself, yeah, I I I drink very rarely now any alcohol beverages. I mean, yeah, it's for health reasons. Yeah.
It's one of those things. And, you know, I was quite open during my cancer journey. I was drinking too much alcohol. So that was having a snowball effect. But I also want to get your agency on a key critical aspect of metabolic well-being. And that's when a patient comes or a client comes as a health coach. And that's the partnership of trust that has to be created. That bond has to be really strong. You've got to learn from that patient, and there's got to be an honesty from both.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
That is so
Yeah.
valuable that people sometimes forget. Oh, I forgot to tell the doctor this because I didn't think it was important.
Yeah, and as a health coach, I think, I mean, you know better than I do, but I think you have an opportunity to have a much deeper bond with the patient than a than a doctor does, who's hiding behind a laptop taking notes, you know, as they have a conversation, which increasingly is the nature of modern medicine these days, which is not a very great way to establish a relationship. So health coaching is an opportunity to really move the needle and make people healthier.
Now, Rob, if you had a crystal ball, you've given us so much information. If you had a crystal ball, what would health education feel like and look like?
Well, I think the concepts we've been talking about, people need to be aware of them, that arthritis from gout is linked to blood pressure or hypertension, because they have the same underlying mechanisms, and that, the other chronic diseases are linked. And the concept that the pills and surgery we give for the late stage treatment of these, in many cases, don't affect the underlying metabolic drivers. And the way to do that is through lifestyle. And this lifestyle should be started, these lifestyle changes should be a lifelong thing, but people should start doing it years to decades before they get the diagnosis in the doctor's office. In other words, let's not keep mopping the floor, but let's patch the roof, as the analogy goes, that
I've got
way. So I'd like to
a
see
friend of mine who's a GP in Southern England, and she works half in private practice and half in the NHS. She's going, sometimes in the NHS, we just mop up. That's all we can do at that stage, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the other great thing is, you've got a brainwave coming out. You've got another book coming out. One of the many publications that you've got. Tell us a little bit more about the thought behind it. And is it out now, or is it coming out in June? Is that right?
The book's going to come out in a week or so, so it'll be out
Fabulous.
by the time the podcast comes out. Yeah, it's called Lies I Taught in Medical School. Shameless plug here.
That's fine.
And you can download a sample chapter on my website if you want to see what it's like, to see if you like it before you get it from your library or buy it. But please check that out. But the idea was just to, after going through this journey, the book talks about my journey, and then as I was forced to re-examine my own beliefs about medicine, I realized there were things that I got wrong and I had taught in the past, and that many of my colleagues were still teaching and still getting wrong, in my opinion. And so I went through the book and I basically listed out the different chapters, different types of diseases. We talk about a lot of the chronic diseases here, and then I talk about a plan for how I reversed mine. Those 4 diseases, basically got off all medications and through lifestyle changes. And then, yeah, and I wanted to get the message out to other people so that they know that there are other options than a lifetime of these pills and surgery sometimes.
I think what I'm taking away, another great aspect for those clients who want to come either to yourself or myself, is that we work in a community as well. So I've tapped into a whole lot of people in Australia, here in the UK. I don't have all the answers. And the beautiful thing is connecting on a podcast like this allows others to actually get that curiosity to start valuing their most
Yeah,
important asset in life. You mentioned
yeah,
that you're the CEO of your own health. I actually rephrase that to you're the CEO, the Chief Energy Officer of your own health.
I like it. I like it. Yeah.
Because when you're eating right, your vibration is higher, your energy levels are higher, your skin's better, you feel better. And it is okay to have a bad day. You're not impervious to having bad days. That goes without saying. But you attract a different tribe of people.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's what gives you joy as well, which is a part of your purposefulness as well. Rob, I'm going to have to close it there because I know we're kind of tight on time, but I've got notes and notes, and it's been brilliant. 1, to meet you, 2, to get this message over. I'm looking forward to getting your book, and I can't thank you enough for the gift of your time this morning.
Oh, thank you so much, Martin, for having me on. And the questions were wonderful. And thanks so much for all the great work you're doing.
Thank you, sir.